Hello coders, welcome to the first code quiz roundup. Last week I pushed out 4 code quiz questions to both Instagram and Twitter, Instagram stories and Twitter, both in the form of polls. What we're going to do today is go through each one of those and discuss the answers. Okay, so the first one is how many HTML heading levels are there? And there was a choice of 6, 4 or 8. So technically speaking, there is 6. So these are H1s, H2s, H3s, H4s, H5s, and of course, H6. These have style implications to the headings, so they get smaller and smaller as they go down or up, I suppose, the levels. And they also provide different semantic meaning as well. So a H1 is more important than a H2, which is more important than a H3, and so on and so forth. So you can create your HTML document to kind of mimic the importance, I suppose, and the flow of the article that you're trying to create. The second one was about PHP. What is a PHP session used for? That was the question. What is a PHP session used for? So I had these 3 answers: storing data between pages, memory protection between pages, and storing log messages between pages. The correct answer there is that we're storing data between pages. PHP sessions are a way of storing data between different pages and accessing that information as well. So for example, if you wanted to store the user's username or color preference, for instance, and then access that information on subsequent pages, then you would be putting that in a PHP session variable. Now, this is very different from cookies because this is held at the PHP level, not at the front end, which means that every user has a unique session ID, and that information is all tied to that. The next question is a HTML question, and that is, what is the aside tag used for? And the options that I gave were primary content, empty content, or indirectly related content. So again, this is a HTML semantics kind of question. So before we give the answer, let's talk about the possible options here. So what is primary content when it comes to HTML? Primary content would be the main content. So for example, it would be, say, the stuff in an article. If you're reading the article, that would be the primary content. Empty content would be things like, I don't know, a horizontal row or a breaking row or anything that doesn't have any content within the tag, right? So there is empty tags that you can use in HTML. Indirect related content is content that is related to the primary content, but in an indirect kind of way. So for example, if you had an article, you were reading an article, and this was in HTML, of course, so it was in the article tags. And then inside the article tags, you would probably have like an aside tag. And in that aside tag, you might have a list of related content, related articles that relate to that primary content that you're looking at. Also, you could have the aside tag used for things like table of contents or any kind of links that relate to or anchor into the primary content, but it isn't the primary content as such. So these tags in HTML are useful for telling the browser what is a primary piece of content and what is the aside piece of content. The last question was again a HTML question, and this is, which HTML attribute references submitted data? So let's say, for example, you have a form and you submit that form to, I don't know, we've used PHP. So let's say we're submitting it to a PHP backend, right? How do you access that information? How do you access the data that was supplied? And what is the HTML attribute that references that submitted data? So the choices that I gave were ID, class, and name. So these are all HTML attributes that you would put on the inputs. The correct answer is name, and quite a few people actually got this wrong. They thought it was ID. ID is the unique identifier that you would use. Say, for instance, if you were doing anything with JavaScript events and you wanted to trigger an event on a specific input and only that one input, that unique input, you would use the ID. You can also reference IDs in HTML for things like CSS if you just want to decorate that one particular unique input, for instance. Classes, again, this is a CSS selector. So you would select inputs by class, and you can have multiple inputs with the same class. So the same class would be shared amongst various different HTML tags. But actually, the thing that we're looking for here is the name attribute. So what happens is when you post a HTML form, so you'd use the method post, and the action goes off to a PHP file. What happens is that you can access the posted variable, and you can access an array, and it's keyed by the name of that input field, the name attribute that you give. So it would be name equals, and then within the quotations, it would be a name that you give that input. And then you can access that input from the posted variable in PHP once you've submitted the form. So this was the first round of the coding quizzes, and this was based on HTML and PHP. Next week, it's going to be completely JavaScript related questions, and I'm going to be throwing in some trick questions in there too. So if you have just started out learning JavaScript, or if you want to test your skills, then do check out How to Code Well at both Instagram and Twitter. Instagram stories and Twitter polls. Go check them out. Happy coding, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Bye.